Like I said before, today, Trump's Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, testified before the Senate. And that hearing also got off to quite a rocky start when Tulsi Gabbard decided to do some, well, last-minute editing to her opening statement, omitting an entire section of her prepared remarks that contradicted Donald Trump's justification for the war in Iran. And those who were following along in the room, and believe me, many were, certainly took note.
I guess what I'm concerned about, one thing is, even in your printed testimony today on page 6, and your last paragraph on page 6, as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. There's been no efforts to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. You omitted that paragraph from your oral opening. Was that because the president had said there was an imminent threat 2 weeks?
No, sir. I recognize that the time was running long, and I skipped through some of the portions.
So you chose to take
my oral delivered remarks.
You chose to omit the parts that contradict the president.
So Tulsi Gabbard wrote in her prepared remarks that Iran's nuclear program had been obliterated, that they were not trying to rebuild a nuclear weapon. There was no nuclear threat from Iran. But then she just conveniently omitted it from what she said on camera. And she likely did that because her boss keeps saying things like this.
We took a little bit of a journey, a little bit of an excursion over the last 2 weeks because we thought we had to do something about very bad people that want to have nuclear weapons. The regime was trying to reconstitute its weapons program at a different site. If we didn't do what we're doing right now, you would have had a nuclear war and they would have taken out many countries.
So Tulsi Gabbard clearly did not want to contradict her boss during today's hearing. That's very clear. But that proved very difficult as the hearing went on. I mean, she wants to have her job tomorrow after these hearings wrap. I get that. But that's not an easy task because her boss has said a lot of things that are pretty easy to contradict, like the question of whether or not Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States prior to Trump's decision to start the war. Now, remember, it was just yesterday when a top Gabbard deputy and MAGA diehard resigned from the administration over the war, claiming that, contrary to Trump's claims, there was no imminent threat from Iran. And he's now on something of a right-wing media tour, telling the other side of the story, the side that Trump certainly doesn't want people to hear.
There was no intelligence that said, hey, on whatever day it was, March 1st, the Iranians are going to launch this big sneak attack. They're going to do some kind of a 9/11 Pearl Harbor, et cetera. They're going to attack one of our bases. There was none of that intelligence.
That was one of Gabbard's former closest aides until he resigned. There was no intelligence that Iran posed an imminent threat, is what he said. Now, watch what happened when Tulsi Gabbard was asked a very similar question today.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False. This is the worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. It is precisely your responsibility to determine what constitutes a threat to the United States.
Tulsi Gabbard doesn't think it's her job to assess whether there is a threat to the country. Not her job, despite the fact that it is precisely her job, and definitely not up to the whims of a president, really any president. So all of this is really embarrassing for Tulsi Gabbard as the top intelligence official in the country. But I think the most embarrassing moment today came from this exchange with Senator Mark Kelly, in which Gabbard dodges a question about a pro-Trump fundraising email that trivialized the war and offered to sell the top secret intelligence to Trump donors.
This is a fundraising email from the president of the United States. And in this email here, where there's multiple links to donate money, it says, as a national security briefing member, you'll receive my private national security briefings.
I'm not familiar with that document, and
it's been made very public 6 days ago.
She's not familiar with that document. It's not a 50-page in-depth document. It was being held up by my first guest here right in front of her. She's also the director of national intelligence. Her entire domain is America's secrets. Don't you think someone would have told her that an email went out offering to sell those secrets and the things that she is holding so close to the highest bidder? You'd think. Or she could Google, whatever. I think the takeaway here is that there is nobody in Donald Trump's cabinet trustworthy enough to deal with the very serious issues facing our country. And we should not expect any real level of competence and directness and the opposite of evasiveness anytime soon. And that reality has only become more alarming given some breaking news tonight, because Reuters just reported that the Trump administration is considering deploying thousands more U.S. troops to reinforce its operation in the Middle East. That's according to one U.S. official and 3 people familiar with the matter.